He got kicked out of the house, not for gambling, not for drinking, just because he couldn't pay rent anymore. That day, the rain hit like ice. Frank stood outside the small rental home. In his hand was an old cloth bag. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. His son-in-law, Dylan, stood with arms crossed. Beside him, Frank's daughter, Megan. Her eyes stayed low. She couldn't look at him. Behind the curtain, a little girl watched. She was only 8. She didn't understand. She only knew. Grandpa was being sent away. Frank didn't cry. He just gripped the bag tighter, as if inside it was his whole life. Maybe it was. Dylan didn't yell, didn't curse, but every word cut deep. You're not helping anymore. We have a kid to raise. We can't take care of you too. Megan said nothing. She just slowly pulled the door. No slam, no shouting, but that quiet click. It echoed louder than any goodbye. Frank turned away. His shoes were old. Every step made a soft, tired sound. Detroit's streets were cold. Cars drove by. No one looked. No one noticed. He'd just lost his home. No one knew. He was once the best builder around here. No one remembered. He'd helped build the building across the street. Frank walked slowly. The wind slapped his face. Rain poured down. Cold, sharp, lonely. Still no tears came. What was in that cloth bag? Not clothes, not food, but a copy of a land deed and a signed bank authorization. Few people knew. Years ago, he got a small compensation. The city canceled a highway project. They gave him a few $1,000s. Everyone said he should buy a car, or maybe a little house, but he didn't. He quietly bought a small lot in a forgotten part of the city. People called it trash land. No water, no power, no legal road access. No one wanted it, but he bought it. And then he forgot it, kept working, kept living, until today. Frank became homeless. On paper, maybe. But in that bag, he held the key to another life. No one knew. No one could guess. Not even the ones who turned him away. He made it to the last bus stop, sat on a cold steel bench. His back ached. His knees burned. But he sat still, didn't sleep, didn't complain. Just watched the dim yellow lights and thought, when was the last time someone hugged him? It was his granddaughter. Back when she was small. She used to hold his hand every night, beg him for fairy tales. Now, she stood silent, didn't speak a word. He didn't blame her. He didn't blame Megan, didn't blame Dylan. He just felt tired. Tired of being too forgiving, too trusting in family ties. Frank leaned back on the bench. The wind slipped through his thin coat. His hand held tight to the bag, but his heart wasn't empty. Actually, for the first time in years, he felt free. No more depending. No more owing. No more being the burden. Just him. And what he had quietly held on to. The next morning, Frank went to a little church, one that served hot soup to the poor. He ate slowly, looked around. Here, everyone had their own sadness, but no one looked down on anyone. No one asked, "What were you before?" Only, "Are you hungry?" He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Frank stayed at the church for 3 straight nights. No one asked about his past. No one needed him to explain. He washed dishes, wiped tables, mopped floors, did everything young folks called dirty work, and he did it in silence. No one knew he once had a house, that he had led 10 major construction projects, that he raised a child alone for nearly 20 years, and no one knew. He had over $2 million sitting in the bank. Frank quietly signed a land sale contract, using a legal trust his lawyer had set up. He didn't want anyone to know he was the owner, didn't want anyone to see his life change, didn't want revenge. He just wanted to be himself. The real estate company didn't suspect a thing. The land he bought years ago was now in a prime location, right in the middle of a newly approved redevelopment zone. City Hall had just greenlit the project. The land's value had skyrocketed over 300 times. Frank sold half of it, kept the other half. He moved the money into a fund named after his late wife. No one reached out. No one asked questions. And he didn't feel the need to explain. To him, that was enough. Frank rented a small room on the south side of town. The space was barely the size of his old garage. The walls were stained. The light flickered, but to Frank, it was heaven. He slept on a bed for the first time in weeks. No one woke him up. No one told him to get groceries. No one looked at him like he was a burden. He opened his old cloth bag, pulled out some folded papers. They were house plans he once drew. Blueprints for a shelter, a place for seniors with no family and nowhere to go. He had forgotten that dream. Now he remembered. The next morning, Frank went to a small coffee shop, bought a hot black coffee, sat near the window, watched people rush by. Everyone looked in a hurry. Everyone looked cold. No one knew. An old man sitting there was about to change their world. Frank called his lawyer. He asked if I wanted to build a shelter for seniors. What kind of permits would I need? The lawyer paused, then asked, "You really want to do this?" Frank replied, "I know what it's like to be left behind. I don't want anyone else to feel that way." Over the next 3 months, Frank quietly bought 3 old houses on the east side near an abandoned factory. The price was shockingly low. People called it a dump, but Frank called it a beginning. He hired contractors to fix up each one, picked out the paint colors himself, bought the beds himself, installed the wiring, checked the plumbing. No one knew he was funding everything. All the contracts were under a non-profit name, Whitmore Hope Foundation. Everyone thought it was some charity group. No one imagined it belonged to an old man once thrown out of his own home. Frank didn't hire a manager. He did everything himself. Cleaned floors, bought rice, hung curtains, cut grass. Then he went to the park, where elderly folks sat curled up on benches. He approached them one by one, didn't ask who they were, just said, "We have open beds, free, no strings attached. All we ask is that you sleep well and stay warm." At first, no one believed him. Who gives something for nothing? Who's kind without a catch? Frank didn't push, just turned away, leaving behind a small paper slip, an address, open hours, and a handwritten note. Who you were doesn't matter. We just want you to live with dignity. The first to arrive was Mr. Martinez. White hair, torn coat at the shoulder. He used to be a high school teacher. Now, he slept on a stone bench near the city library. He knocked on the door of House 43. Frank opened it. He didn't ask anything, just gave a small smile and stepped aside. The bunk beds are at the end of the hall. There's a hot meal, thick blankets, and a warm shower. Martinez stood still for a long moment. He whispered, "I don't have anything to give." Frank placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already given," he said. "You spent your whole life teaching others how to live kindly. Now, it's your turn to receive." A week later, two more arrived. An elderly woman just discharged from the hospital, and a man with one leg who once served in the military. They sat at the same table. No one asked about the past. They just shared warm porridge and nodded quietly when someone told a story. Frank stood in the kitchen. He could hear the gentle laughter echo down the hall. His chest felt warmer. He didn't need thanks. He only needed to know they weren't cold anymore. Frank used money from the fund to buy heaters, more beds, old books for a small reading room. Every morning, he made coffee. Every night, he checked every door lock. He didn't take a single day off. Not on Thanksgiving, not on Christmas, because he knew the people here didn't get holidays. They only got cold nights and a hope that barely held on. One afternoon, as Frank was cleaning a window, he saw a familiar figure. It was Dylan, his son-in-law, the one who had kicked him out. Dylan stood in front of the volunteer board, staring at a flyer. His face was gaunt, his shirt wrinkled. Frank stepped outside. He said nothing. Dylan looked up, eyes wide. "Is that you?" Frank nodded softly. Dylan lowered his head, his voice barely audible. "I lost my job. Megan. She left with our daughter. I have nothing left." Frank didn't move. Dylan added, I was wondering if I could help out here." Frank looked into his eyes, then said slowly, "You once had everything and didn't know how to keep it. Now, you get to start again. Start with the dishes, and by listening." Dylan nodded hard. Tears hit the floor. Frank turned away, but his heart wasn't cold anymore. Dylan started working every morning. He washed dishes, swept the yard, wiped down windows. No complaints, no grumbling. He wasn't the arrogant man he once was. Frank didn't praise him, didn't bring up the past. He just let Dylan see himself more clearly. 3 weeks passed. Dylan was waking up earlier than Frank. He went to the market on his own, bought fresh vegetables, straightened bookshelves in the reading room. Mr. Martinez watched him quietly, then said in a soft voice, "You've changed. You never looked me in the eye before." Dylan scratched his head and gave a faint smile. "Back then, I didn't dare look at anyone." One early winter morning, Frank received a letter. No return address. Handwritten. He opened it and instantly knew the handwriting. It was from Megan, his daughter. "Dad, I was wrong. I was scared, and I regret everything. I don't have the courage to come back, but I miss you." Frank held the letter, sat still for a long time, said nothing, just stared out at the backyard, where the wild daisies had just bloomed. That evening, he left the letter on the kitchen table. Dylan found it, read it in silence, then simply said, "She cries every night." "I know." Frank turned to him, and for the first time, he placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder. "She's my daughter, but she needs to walk back on her own. No one gets carried forever." 2 days later, a car stopped outside the center. Megan stepped out, messy hair, wrinkled clothes, eyes red from crying. She carried nothing but a cloth bag. Frank was planting in the side garden. Megan slowly walked over. She said nothing. Frank looked up. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Then Megan broke down. "Dad, I'm sorry." Frank didn't answer right away. He just opened the gate and said, There's a room available, but you'll have to sweep it yourself. Megan nodded hard. She picked up a broom and started cleaning, just like Dylan once had. Frank watched her, his eyes slightly red, but his lips held firm. Inside him, something quietly let go. Megan woke up early every day. She helped in the kitchen, peeled carrots, washed rice, cleaned rooms, fixed curtains, taped broken picture frames. She didn't ask about the past, didn't ask where her dad got the money, never brought up the day she closed the door on him. She just lowered her head and quietly did the small things. Frank watched, but said nothing. He let her mend things through actions, not words. One Friday afternoon, the center hosted a community meal. Everyone brought a dish. An old man walked in, wearing a worn coat, his face wrinkled and kind. He carried an apple pie. Frank welcomed him inside. The man looked around and smiled, toothless. It's been a long time since I felt this warm. Feels like a real family. Frank didn't answer. He just poured some tea and gently slid the cup toward him. That night, before locking up, Megan asked her father, "Aren't you angry that I turned my back on you?" Frank replied slowly, "I used to be. Very much. But then I realized people turn away when they're blinded. It's not that they don't love. They just don't know how to love the right way." Megan hugged him tightly for the first time in 10 years. Frank gently patted her back. No tears, no blame. Just two people learning how to love again. The next morning, a luxury car pulled up outside the center. A young woman stepped out, holding a press badge. She knocked. Frank opened the door. "I'd like to do a feature story on you," she said, "about how you built this place." Frank shook his head. "You should look for someone else. I didn't do this for attention." The reporter looked surprised. "But your story could inspire so many." Frank smiled. "Then write it. But don't use my name. Just say it came from someone who once felt forgotten." That spring, flowers bloomed across the backyard. Mr. Martinez built a wooden bench. Dylan added a small awning. Megan planted lavender by the gate. Frank still woke up early. Still made chicken porridge every Monday. Still checked every lock each night. But his legs weren't as strong anymore. His back had begun to hunch noticeably. One afternoon, Frank sat on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, watching people walk in. He smiled, greeted them, pulled out chairs, invited them to eat. He watched them like he wanted to etch their faces into his heart. Megan stepped outside and sat beside him. She asked, "What do you see, Dad?" Frank answered slowly, "I see. I was never really abandoned. I just took a wrong path for a while. But now, I found my way back." That night, Frank went to bed early, just like always. He laid out his sheets, folded his shirt, slipped his old cloth bag under the pillow, then lay on his side and let out a soft sigh. The next morning, Frank didn't wake up. He passed in his sleep. No pain, no struggle. Just like someone who had finished what they came to do. The funeral was held at the center. There was no fancy casket, just an old photo, and a wooden sign that read, "Frank Whitmore, gatekeeper for those with no home." More than 100 people came. People who once slept on park benches. People who once had porridge on a freezing night. People who once believed they were forgotten by the world. They shared stories about Frank. How he never asked about their past. Never asked for names. Only this, "Are you hungry? Do you want a warm place to sleep?" Megan stepped up, holding her father's old cloth bag. Her voice caught, but then she spoke. My father was kicked out of his home, not because he did something wrong, but because we didn't understand him. Now I do. He never needed fame. He only needed to be seen and trusted. She placed the bag on the altar where her father used to sit every night. Dylan stood beside her, nodded, wiped away quiet tears. 3 months later, the center was renamed from Whitmore Hope Foundation to simply Frank's Place. The wooden gate was repainted, and carved into it were the words, "The door is always open, no matter where you came from." Everyone who walks through it knows Frank, not because he was rich, but because he chose to love when others chose to walk away. No one ever became poor by showing kindness. No one ever truly lost by choosing compassion. Frank never sought revenge. He didn't use his money to hurt others. He used his rejection to build a home for the forgotten. If you've ever felt unwanted, if someone has turned their back on you, remember Frank's story. Because real worth isn't measured by what's in your pocket. It's found in what your heart chooses to hold on to. If you've ever been misunderstood or judged unfairly, comment, "I still have worth." And don't forget to subscribe, because more healing stories are waiting for you.